Hello, I am outside Nickolls and Perks today, and I am beyond excited because today I get to accomplish what is effectively the whiskey pilgrimage outside of Kentucky, and that is to finally get my first ever almost full flight tasting of Buffalo Trace Antique Collection and Pappy's. So you can see maybe just a little sneak peek in the window behind me. We'll have a look at that right in a second. But we've got some really great tastings today. A little bit of a surprise. I'm so excited. This is my first time to try any of these whiskeys, and I am beyond excited. I'm a total noob to this. I've not to whiskey, but to this level, and I'm just completely thrilled at an opportunity to actually get to have a tasting of this, and from what I hear, what I learn, the opportunity to pick one up for myself. Anyway, gonna go in. We have the new tasting room. Looking nice. I'm just getting set up here.
Okay, we're all here. Thank you so much for coming along, folks. I will keep this short and sweet because I know some of the most fabulous bourbon and wine on the planet is staring at you tantalisingly. Every now and then we become very lucky in that we have a good look in on some BTACs, Pappies, all the fabulous bits from Sazerac UK. Tonight is the night where we share those bits with folks and you get to leave with a bottle. So first of all, thank you so much for supporting Nickolls and Perks in the past. That's part of the reason why you're here tonight. This is also the inauguration of our brand new tasting room. We've commissioned this to accommodate sort of slightly more special tastings like this. You know, the cellar's dripping with history, but I think when you've got whiskies of this calibre, you kind of want to drink them all side by side, go back. That's very much the sort of theme tonight. This is going to be a nice, relaxed session. Liam and Miles are going to go through the whole format in a bit more detail in a moment. But this is not just a sort of standard 1 to 6. We're going to go back and forth a bit. And many of you have probably heard the Buffalo Trace story many times over. So you know, we're not going to drown you in all that info over and over again. Likewise, though, if you do want to ask anything, there is no better masterclass that you can do in the UK than with Miles and Liam, who head the prestige arm of Sazerac in the UK. So they really are the folks to talk to about anything that you're about to drink tonight. Just to hit you with sort of the protocol bits.
Eyes down.
The whiskies, they're numbered 1 to 6, but they're not numbered on your sheet. Miles is going to sort of guide you back and forth. You might start at number 6 and go back to number 2. You know, we're going all over the place a bit tonight, but there is a logic to it all. Also, as you may see, there are prices. You can buy the whiskies that you're drinking tonight. They're all lined up behind you on that top shelf there. There are no wrong answers, except I don't want one, I guess. Everything there is of extreme calibre from Sazerac. Obviously there's 12 bottles there, there are 12 of you in this room, so we'll do some sort of drawing of names of who gets to have first dibs, but as I say, don't feel sort of down on your luck if you're last, because there's no wrong answers on that top shelf there. I do have to say, there are 7-8 grams whiskies on tonight? Ish. We haven't really sussed out how much you're drinking tonight. And also, they are strong. 8. There are some strong whiskies on it, so a half tongue-in-cheek but half sort of serious duty of care here. It's strong stuff. Please do drink water. If that water runs out, Jerome and I will just fill it up and bring it back down. I do encourage you to do it. Likewise, if you like to play around with water in your whiskey, there's pipettes, there's glassware out, so you're welcome to do that as well. The chaps can sort of point you in the right direction if you're unsure about all of that. Over to that, folks. I know you want to get to the bone, so please can you give a big round of applause to Miles and Liam from Sazerac.
Thank you very much, and certainly sort of on behalf of Liam and I, thanks to Jerome and Steve and Dave for primarily just the way that since we started working nearly a year ago, just the sole approach to having some whiskey like this, and how, you know, I won't bore anybody with it, but how it can become a little bit tainted in terms of selling it at different prices to different people, and it becomes a little bit murky, whereas the guys have been, you know, I said it last time back in December, sort of hell-bent on making sure that the likes of you guys and people in the room get access to liquid taste, which is obviously first and foremost, but more importantly, like, you get to take some stuff home at a price that you feel hopefully fairly comfortable paying. And sort of Liam has championed the way of accessing these liquids for the last 4 and a bit years. I've only come in for the last 11 months, and are just trying to do the same sort of thing around the country to give those that seek out our whiskey a chance to drink it and a chance to buy it and take it home and enjoy it at their leisure. So yeah, so my name's Miles, look after the south of the country, which is from here down basically, so I had to come an awful long way up just to get to the Midlands, which is, you know, I'm sure you've heard that terrible joke a few times before. Yeah, look after that, and then Liam is sort of high net worth in central London doing his job, and a very good job too. So
Thanks.
yeah, that's being recorded, so I might as well say that. Just on tonight, we've got a really stellar lineup of whiskies for you to taste. Liam and I are here. We're not going to sort of overdo it on each whiskey. We want you to savour it, enjoy it, kind of make your own journey through it, and we're obviously here to answer, probably Liam more than me, but as many questions as you possibly have. Just to really confuse everybody, and we'll do this once and we'll reiterate, we're going to go in the order of, I hope you can get the first bit okay, 1, 3, 5, 2, 4, Stagg, which is unnumbered just for fun, and 6.
We'll talk you through it as the
Yeah.
numbers this evening.
So-
All we're trying to do, so rather than, I think, doing tastings, and you'll all be the same, you generally either go in ABV or you go in age. I think the way we're trying to educate, and as Miles said, first and foremost, what we're trying to do at Buffalo Trace is actually get people opening and drinking the liquid, which is why we work with the guys, because we're aware that supply never meets demand on our products. So we're aware that they probably are some of the most traded in the world. So actually getting them open and getting them drunk is exactly why we're here, because we know this is the way the guys work. But for this, what we're trying to do, so we're going to start with wheated, we'll move on to rye, and then we're going to finish on mash bill 1. So the strength is building. So out of the 8, you have got 5 cask strengths. So as we said, water, take your time, you're all used to it, so it's fine. Just don't want anyone peeking before the break, and then you'll miss the really good stuff after it.
So we will, I'll sort of spare you the in detail, but obviously everything you've got in front of you is from Buffalo Trace Distillery. We were fortunate enough to go out a couple of weeks ago and see sort of not only what the sort of current looks like, but what the future looks like in some of the older expressions that we hope to see, so we can talk about that later. But yeah, it's a distillery that hopefully everybody here is well familiar with, picking up awards every single time pretty much a batch of whiskey's entered. But we do enter an awful lot of whiskies in it, so you'd like to think that they pick up some stuff. And one of the, sort of hopefully sort of pioneering and shining a light on the category, particularly in the UK, as we can go from, which we're not doing tonight, benchmark Buffalo Trace Eagle Rare, right the way up to drinking sort of 20, 25-year-old American whiskey bourbon. But tonight we're starting right at the creme de la creme. So whiskey number 1, Van Winkle Special Reserve 12-year-old, so that will be number 1, thank God, that's an easy start.
See what we did there?
Yeah. Liam and our attention span dwindles after about 20-25 minutes, so you'll start to see why the numbers go skew with.
Or dram 3.
So as for us to have, obviously sort of the age statement starts at 10 for the Van Winkle, and then 12, 13, 15, 20 and 23. Just before we talk about the Van Winkle brand and sort of what goes on at the distillery, our kind of metric is to try, with certainly 10, 12 and 15 tastings like this, get people to taste them. 20 and 23 we get in slightly smaller amounts, so it becomes a little bit more tricky to try and work at a retail speed on that, and the on-trade becomes kind of a bit of a staple because it's easier to put on menu and have at a price point that people can consume. However, you will see some nice sort of spot tastings where they're all included, but we try our best to get something to people that have the desire to taste. So here you've got the 12-year-old, so wheated bourbon. So talking about mash bills, we're doing this certainly in how I've been working over the last year, completely different. Starting with a wheated bourbon, gentle proof, 45.2 ABV, is that right? Yeah. And 12 years old. So if you look at, for example, on the corn side, Buffalo Trace being 6 to 8 years old, Eagle Rare 10. We have some Weller SKUs such as 12, which kind of have been a nice benchmark in the wheated bourbon market. This at 45.2, compared to the lineup that we've got tonight, I think is a really nice sort of sweet spot to start on. So you're switching out. Yeah, I've never started a tasting with Van Winkle 12-year-olds, so tonight's a good night.
Do you know what you're missing?
Yeah, I need to spend more time with you guys. So yeah, typically you've obviously got a high corn percentage. You just switch out the rye for the wheat for those that haven't had too much of this wheated bourbon before, and a little bit of malted barley. Corn at sort of at least 51% by law. You've got your sweetness, you've got that sort of typical note that you'd always depict, which I think really balances well on this. I'll let you taste it in a minute. But wheat, rye we'll talk about later, but is extremely prominent in terms of its profile for spice and sort of that peppery nature. Wheat for me, and I'm not old enough to have drunk an awful lot of wheated whiskey, but for spending some time with Liam, I've drunk enough. It just really softens and mellows the flavour profile versus corn and rye. So, yeah, the Van Winkle family we'll talk about a little bit after as we sort of merge between the first and second dram. But cheers to everyone, and thank you so much for coming tonight. It means an awful lot to be here.
Yeah, I think just picking up on what Mark said, the reason why we're starting to split by flavour profile is I've been here 4 years, although in the industry for 25. I'm convinced the average person doesn't go into a supermarket and shop flavour, they shop price. So they'll buy Jack, they'll buy Woodford, they'll buy Makers for whatever reason, mainly down to price, but they won't understand if they find a brand they like or one they don't like, they won't understand why. So from working in the industry and working with other brands, I think the easiest way to start the consumer to understand is talk about the building blocks of what creates bourbon. So as Miles said, the corn is going to give you the sweetness, rye gives you a spicy nature, and you always need an element of malt because you need the enzymes in it to break down the sugars for the yeast to do its work. With wheat, and we'll go on and we'll taste William Larue Weller, but the Wellers settled in Kentucky in 1794. They moved, they were farmers. So in the early days of the barter system, where they had grain, rather than it spoil, because there's moisture in the grain, and rather than it go off, they would distill it and set about their early moonshine using wheat. And William Larue loved what wheated bourbon did. Pappy then goes to work for William Larue Weller at the back of the 1800s. And it sort of goes full circle then. Pappy opens Nickolls and Perks in 1935, and then you have the sort of in the 50s, the launch of Maker's Mark. We took Weller in the early 2000s, and then it goes sort of full circle that by 2002, we worked with the Van Winkles and we signed an agreement. So everything since 2002 under the Pappy banner has been made at Buffalo Trace. So they realised up to that point, they sold the distillery in 75, Nickolls and Perks, and it started to get broken down. So it's a ghosted distillery. There's no Pappy out of Nickolls and Perks anymore. And when they sold it and they took the brand, which was initially the Pappy 10, the old rip, they were sourcing liquid. So by the time the 2000s come, there was bits of Bernheim in liquid, there was bits of all sorts in 75, but they realised if they wanted to grow the brand, they had to have a consistent supply. So we'd already bought the Weller brand and we were making our wheated bourbon under the Weller brand. So by 2002, it gave them consistent supply. So for the last, effectively 22 years, and if you think of a brand or you think of a SKU like Pappy 23, we're now at the point 23 years later from our first agreement that we're getting to a point where it's nearly 100% Buffalo Trace liquid. So some people might scoff at that and say, well, look, it's changed. But what it is giving you is the consistency of flavour under the wheated banner. Wheat for me, as Miles said, rye gives you the spice, corn gives you the sweetness. But wheat almost ages more elegantly. I think it's a lot softer. It allows the fruit in the corn to shine through. Some people, and I've done sort of work with scientists and stuff before, when you talk about rye, it can be quite angular, quite clashy. And you know, we've tasted liquid where you put people in a room and get them to listen to heavy metal and they're like, it's really harsh, it's angular, whereas if you get them listening to waves lapping, it's soft and it caresses. And wheat tends to do that, whereas rye can be quite polarizing. So wheat tends to be a lot softer, and I think wheat as a grain generally has a sweet spot sort of up to 20 years. Whereas I think corn then, and we'll talk about it later, but where you get older expressions of what we're doing, it's corn led because it's a bit more rigid and can sustain that aging process with the oak. But with wheat in particular, I think it's a really careful balancing act that how far is too far, because it's so gentle and because it's so soft. So hopefully you find that certainly in Pappy 12. And I just briefly talk what sets it apart as a Van Winkle as opposed to a Weller. So there's there's more than two existing members, but Pappy's grandson Julian and his son Preston, along with Drew, our blender. So when we do our Pappy collection for the year, they will nose all the wheated barrels. All three of them have to agree that it has an essence of Pappy. And to be brutally honest, it sort of goes back. Julian is the gatekeeper because he still remembers being on his granddad's distillery, smelling the wheat, smelling the profile. So I think you'll all agree, when you start to understand flavour and you pick up aromas, it can remind you of a room, a kitchen, a place in time. And Julian's got that locked in terms of what that Pappy flavour is. So he'll sit down with his son and with Drew. All three of them have to agree, and if they don't declare it wheated for Pappy, it goes and effectively goes into the Weller portfolio. So it's not to say it's not good liquid, it's just not what they consider to have the flavour profile of Pappy. So that's the only difference, but exactly the same mash bill. I assume, has everyone had this at some stage? First time for anyone?
Yeah, first time, yeah. First time, yeah.
And what do you think?
It's beautiful.
It's a I know it sounds stupid, this is what we were talking about, it's about getting it drunk. I'm convinced Pappy is the most traded product in the world because it gets to a point that the secondary value is probably £1,000 a bottle for 12. You probably look more than I do, but say 8 to £1,000-ish, something like that. And then it gets to a point that you go, well, who's drinking £1,000 bottle of whiskey? No one. At retail, it's a lovely whiskey, and it's about access, which is exactly why we do these and putting it into the hands of the right people. So yeah, I hope you like it. It's not a bad start.
I was going to literally about to say.
End of the week dram, it's a good starter on a Friday night.
Punches above its weight, actually, I think, for 45. Yeah.
It does, if you compare it, I think if you can compare it to, if you take Sazerac at 45, if you take Eagle Rare at 45, it's only a 0.2 of difference. And if you ever get the opportunity, try this or get someone to do it blind versus Weller 12. And it makes you realise how good Weller 12 is when it's up against this as well. And it generally, as I said, as your palate starts to talk wheat and to understand it, this is exactly why we try and teach flavour profile, because as I said at the start, people go in and they buy Maker's Mark. So realistically, the only sort of wheated you're buying at retail is Maker's Mark. We're going to be starting to bring in Weller Special Reserve as an entry level, and we'll have enough in the market that it will flood it, that it won't have a secondary. So it will become a competitor under 40 quid to compete with Maker's Mark, that we can then start telling the story of, well, what's wheat? For anyone that drinks Maker's Mark and likes it, they probably don't know why. Because it's softer, and again in that elegance, if that's what they're looking for. So they certainly don't get access to Pappy on a normal basis. So having something like Weller Special Reserve, similar age profile, similar ABV at 45, it starts to have that conversation about, well, do I like wheat and why do I like it? And then once you've got, I'm sure you've shown the guys and we've seen it before, we have things called flavour trees. So under a mash bill, we'll show you the route you can go on. Once you understand what you like, it's endless. you've got brands that you can chase and go and look at. So that's the idea, and that's what we're trying to do with Wheated as we sort of grow as a company and build. But fundamentally, it's about educating the consumer on the building blocks, and then go. I'm sure you've all sat down. Do you like bourbon? Do you like sherry? Do you like port casks? For 20 years, I worked for Irish distillers, and Redbreast was a brand I worked on for years and loved. And I thought I loved sherry casks. I didn't. I like sherry finishes. Because effectively it's 20 odd years in bourbon or whatever you are, and then it's the extra aging in sherry. You take something like Aberlour Rabuna, which is a big sherry cask strength bomb, and I didn't like it. So it's trying to understand what you like, and then you can go anywhere you like. So yeah, anyone that says they don't like whiskey, they just haven't found one they like. They've generally probably drunk a Lagavulin or a Lafroig, like drinking an ashtray as a first whiskey. It hits you, it's big, it's medicinal.
18 years old.
But yeah, I think it's the one category out of all of them where once you start to know what you like, you can go on a journey of trying to find something.
There's a lot of good wheated out there. We brought up recently, didn't we, James, that Emma Castro?
Yeah.
Really nice. It was like 30, 40 quid in
Yeah,
there.
there's some amazing wheat out there. I think the problem is, and particularly with the US, and we'll talk about it, because all these are 750 ml. We've just opened an office, I was just out there this week in Switzerland, trying to get compliance from the US distillery where 750 is a legal size to get it into the UK where it's a 700. The red tape you jump through, the compliance, the issues. So, is there any Americans in the room? No.
Well safeguarded.
America, as I said, you know, we've got hotels older than America. Like that's just fact. So America tends to be very east to west coast, and they're only now starting to globalise. And as a result, then you're starting to see, well, what is compliance in Europe? What do we need? So there's so many amazing wheats out there, but getting them over at a price point in a 700 ml and having them available is the challenge. So again, I think it's getting them in there and getting people to have that conversation. You know what, I mean, bars, restaurants, retailers alike, if wheat is in demand, they will go and find wheat. But it's just that education as to what it is. I think particularly in bourbon as well, you know, we're talking 1% of the 1%. You know, we've opened the tasting experience at Brown Home in Covent Garden. It's not really for enthusiasts. You know, if you turn up and you're like, can I buy Pappy? You're going to be really disappointed because that's not what it's about. It's about trying to get someone that knows nothing to understand, well, what is Buffalo Trace? What is Eagle Rare? You know, when I say to people I work for Buffalo Trace, if you're in the trade, you know it. So Buffalo launched the same year I started in '99. But to my family, I have to tell them I work for Southern Comfort because they don't know what Buffalo Trace is, but yet everyone's heard of Southern Comfort. So it's a level of when we get to a point that you say Buffalo Trace and having that store there to bring people in and educate them on flavour, as soon as it gets more recognition, that's when you know you're starting to turn and people are starting to understand. So it's a long journey that we're only at the start of, but we're getting there. I think that's bourbon in general, not just Buffalo Trace, but we're trying to get there.
And you're lucky because you're in it early, so as it grows and develops, your number's in the book, so you should be absolutely fine.
If it makes you feel better, my wife now knows Buffalo Trace because that's the only one she's allowed to touch. When she makes her old fashions, because we was in Northampton, when she rang me, she'd made several old fashions with Stagg Junior. She regretted it the next day.
Yeah, when she wake up Monday. She
was struggling the next day, put it that way.
Yeah, it does hit.
Yeah.
But again, it's an education piece because if you're drinking cask strength, a glass of cask strength is 2 glasses of something normal. It's a big hit, so that's why lots of water. Proceed with caution.
And in a sort of our personal opinion, some of these don't quite drink their proof either, so you do get a little bit stuck. Hence the cheese, the crackers, you know, to try and soften the blow. So moving on. Yeah. So your number 3 on your tasting chart is the Pappy Van Winkle 15-year-old. So this obviously aged 15 years. Kind of, like Liam said, the wheated barrels that are approved, picked by the Van Winkle family. At this kind of age, they typically, well, all of the wheated pretty much will sit at the lower floors of the warehouse. So if you think of a rick house that has up to 8 floors, Pappy at 15 years old will be on the lower floors. We'll let the heat rise to the top. It's a slightly more mellow aging facility down low, and we'll talk about some sort of actions that are being put in place to facilitate even further aging past the existing profile. Sorry, I thought that was someone's phone. So this, aged on the lower floors of the warehouse, 15 years old, 53.5 in proof, in ABV, sorry. So I'd assume most people are pretty comfortable drinking this, but this is can be a little bit strong to people. Please do use a drop of water. Sort of in my not that long tasting history, this is just something that
More round, isn't it?
Yeah.
blows the socks off me every single time I drink it. At 15 years old, kind of that balance between corn and wheat and then time spent in contact with wood. Yeah, it's all personal profile and flavour sort of taste, but at 15 years old and about the proof that I can sit and drink a few before golf the next morning and not miss my early tea time. So these two, I think
Someone's living the dream.
Yeah, not tomorrow, unfortunately. We've started off at a really gentle pace in terms of 45.2, but then moving up into the 50s. So I won't say too much on this because I think it's a whiskey that if you haven't had it, you should just enjoy it at your own leisure. So let us know what you think, basically.
Yeah, we were just out there, and I think most people in here drink it at high proof anyway, but if you don't, one of the ways, and Freddie does this at the distillery, which I think is a great way of doing it, even if you're used to bigger ABVs. But when you add water to a liquid, it creates an exothermic reaction. There's a bit of heat, it warms up. That's why if you have anything cold, if your white wine's too cold, you can have, if it's a really bad, cheap white wine, stick it in the fridge and chill it, because it will just kill the flavour. So when something's cold, it sort of closes it. When it warms, it opens it up. And what Freddie does, particularly as you start getting to this, if you're not used to it or not sure if you like it, take a sip of water and leave the water in your mouth, and then sip the whiskey. So you'll get the flavour without getting the heat. And it's a really good way, particularly if people don't drink a lot of whiskey and you're doing this at home, it's a really good way to bring people into the flavour profile of understanding what they like, so you're not getting that whack of heat. But yeah, I mean, it's at 53.5 or 107 proof, it's a historic ABV more than anything. I think up to I can't remember, I think it was 1962. Generally, the laws changed. So stuff used to go into barrel sort of at 100 proof. So that 53.5 after 4 years, which legally it becomes bourbon, you don't need to put an age on it. That was the natural rise. So it went in at 100 proof, and after 4 years it would come out at 107. So it's a really historic ABV, if you like, and you'll get it. I mean, obviously we do it in our wheated. Interestingly, on bourbon, the max you can go into barrel is 125. On wheat, where it's a bit softer, we drop that to 114 proof to 57 ABV. Because it's so delicate, we actually want it to work with the oak. If you went in any higher, the oak would almost overpower it, so that's why the ABV sort of slightly drops. But I think on the 15 for me, from the 12, it starts for me getting sort of milk chocolatey, and it starts moving away from that core. It's less fruity, and you'll find with bourbons, the older they are, if they start off being vibrant and fruity and fleshy like apricots and peach, the older it gets, the fruits get darker, and you get your chocolate and you get your leather starting to come through. And this is, you'll hear a lot of people talk about Pappy, and 15 is where a lot of people think that sweet spot is. As it goes on to 20 and 23, you do start to get a lot more oak and a lot more influence on the whiskey, which hopefully we can maybe introduce next year. I've seen the allocations for next year, and it's more than we've ever had. So potentially next year,
news, that is.
I saw them.
Just FYI.
I saw them this morning. They were confirmed. But again, this time next year, or the next time we do this, we might be able to have some Pappy 23 in it to raise the bar, because we are getting some more. So that's one to look out for.
Bigger output or Americans?
No, I mean it's a yielded product year in, year out. I think because Europe is 700 stalwart, Europe can't have any of it. So we get away with it in the UK, because I think government sort of says, well, look, as long as it's a batch process, we're fine with it. Switzerland gets a few cases, but nowhere else in Europe gets it. We are in the process of trying to move that to a 700 mil. A 700 mil is now a legal size in the US, but then you also run the risk of going, well, hold on a minute, I was paying X amount in a 750, you've now dropped it, and it's hard enough to get anyway. So that's a challenge that we're trying to work through in the US. But yeah, and that's the issue. So as I said, the incoming allocations that generally land around sort of December, January, you could have a really good year. And again, the 23 also is going back to 23 years ago when we started making it, so we've been able to forecast and plan it. So I don't think it's coincidence. But it also means then if you're lucky enough to get one, people assume, oh, I could get one next year, but it's yielded, so all of a sudden a bad harvest, a bad winter, a poor summer, whatever it may be, all of a sudden drops it. So the yield does vary, but I think this year's yield is higher on the aged stock because we've been able to control it since 2002. So that's an indicator as to sticking with one distillery and knowing what's happening. You know, whiskey's not a gin sort of switch it on a Monday, bottle it Monday afternoon. This is like a 15, 20 year forecast on normal stuff. So to have the foresight and to be able to do it, we've been lucky in the sense that that's the time it's took. You know, at Buffalo Trace, we're in the process of spending 1.2 billion on expanding the distillery. We're doubling capacity. We're filling 2,500 barrels a day of new make spirit, which is about 500,000 litres. We're building 4 warehouses a year. Like, it's frightening in terms of trying to meet demand. And again, as Miles said, don't forget, you know, in Scotland, when you put stuff into barrel at 63.5%, it reduces in ABV because there's humidity in there and it's a slow graduation. In Kentucky, where it's arid dry, you go in at 62.5 and it rises because the water is evaporating quicker than the alcohol. So we have to put so much more into barrel, knowing because of how arid it is, we're losing it. So when you look at Pappy 23 or any sort of 20-year-old bourbon, from a 200 litre start, you might only have 10 litres left after 20 years, which is why you don't see 50-year-old bourbons, because it just evaporates out. So that's why we'll say, I mean, a year is a year, but if you're looking at a 20-year-old bourbon, it's almost like for like. You're probably looking at a 40, 50-year-old single malt, because after 25 years, I mean, even at 20 years, you have to be really careful because it can just extract. You'd be left with nothing. So the finance people at Buffalo are always interesting because it's constantly you're aging something to try and get a product, but at the same time they're having kittens because the longer it's in there, it's evaporating more and more. So it's a really careful balance.
Are you putting those barrels in like different areas? Kind of?
Yeah.
Funny you should say that, Joe.
We'll talk about it.
Loaded question.
If any of you have been out to Buffalo or know what we do or seen the experimental series, we have a 5-chamber warehouse on site that allows us to play and experiment. So for those of you that have followed us a long time years ago, or one of the first E.H. Taylor sort of early releases was something called Tornado Surviving Warehouse C. Tornado come through and rip the roof off Warehouse C. That's what it says on the tin. It's not like, I don't think we had marketeers at that stage. It was like, this is what it is. But ripped the roof off, which meant during the summer, the sun obviously penetrated these barrels. When they tasted the barrels, they called them honey barrels, like they were the sweetest liquid that they had out of Warehouse C in a while. And they ended up bottling it and commemorating it under E.H. Taylor Warehouse C. So what that encouraged was them to go, well, it must be down to sunlight. The roof's off, they've been baked in sun, that's what's made them honey barrels. So we built BarrelRollX. So as I said, 5 chambers, you've got 1 standard and 4 others. I think there's 36 barrels in it, but it means you can control temperature, sunlight, airflow, all the different parameters of what you expect whiskey to be. So it basically means it's just an open warehouse laboratory. So we play around with stuff. So when the roof came off for 2 years, they concentrated on sunlight, what it did to barrels. And after 2 years, they realised it did nothing. So basically all it did was create more experiments to go, well, it must have been airflow, it could be climate, what was it? So we've used BarrelRollX for the last sort of 15 years in terms of having these experiments. And we talk about now being over 1 million different data points in terms of what happened. So as a result of BarrelRollX, we now have warehouse P, which is a temperature controlled warehouse, which means we can obviously control temperature, humidity, airflow, and now we're playing around with, well, what does that do to age liquid? So at 23, 24, 25 years, if we manipulate that, can we get a 30, 40-year-old bourbon? So again, if we're around here in 15 years' time, I dare say we can come back and do an even bigger tasting. But that's the sort of science and the planning of what's going on in the background to get to a point where we're trying to age bourbon. If you speak to Harlan, our distiller, and say, what's the best whiskey you've ever made? He'll say, I haven't yet. I'm still learning. I know what we're doing and we've 200 years of know-how, but he'll tell you he hasn't made his best yet because we're constantly experimenting and pushing boundaries. So that's, I would expect to see older ages as you go through. Because we know that's what the consumer uses age as a signpost. It's a signpost of price, it's a signpost of quality, and you can see through, I don't know, if you take some of the Scottish brands like Macallan or Glenlivet, by taking age statements off, the consumer goes, well, hold on a minute, what's in it? Because I've got no sign now of working out what I'm paying for. And so we're sort of going the other way because we know it's a really good indicator for the consumer. There's a lot of safety in knowing age. And so, yeah.
How did everyone get on with the first two?
The 15's a big step up from the 12, like for 2 years, it's a big difference.
The delivery of the flavours is completely
Three.
It's stronger as well.
It's common.
Really strong.
Coming back to school, Dave, I don't have any more.
The way I talk about, so if you imagine, so we're going from 42.5 to 53.5, so it's a fair jump in ABV, but it's almost, I almost try and think, if you're making a tomato sauce at home, as the water evaporates and it concentrates, the flavour increases. And that's exactly what happens. So 1 or 2 percentage points on an ABV has such a massive impact on flavour, because I know everyone talks about ABV or proof, the rest of the percentage is water. So equally, if you had a Robinson's cordial at home and made something with 58% water and 42% concentrate and then did it 53.5 versus 46, you'd get such a different concentrate. And it's a really simple way of looking at it. Everyone talks ABV, but you almost have to think of the water concentrate as well on the back of it. So I always use that, not that I make tomato sauces too often, but you get the idea of reducing something because it brings out the flavour. And if you've more water, it's obviously more diluted, so less flavour, less water and higher ABV, you get that burst of flavour. So that's exactly what it does. You wouldn't think it would be as big, but it shows you the gap.
Do they do any like pressure testing in the warehouse eggs? Like vacuum or?
Yeah, without going too much into it, but yeah. I mean, the way we cook our grains under pressure and we cool under vacuum. So when we're trying to make Buffalo Trace, it's about efficiencies. So everything happens for a reason. So, we cook under pressure to make it as quick as possible. We cool under vacuum for as quick as possible to get as much in there. Also to be able to produce as much white spirit as we can on a daily basis. So it's efficiencies of scale. I think if you go to Scottish distilleries, it's the romanticism of the millstone and the water wheel and one flavour, and it's quite quaint. And you go to something like Buffalo Trace and it's like a mothership. It's literally there to produce as much liquid as physically possible because it's in the warehouse. If you talk to a distiller, they'll say it's in the still house. If you talk to a blender, they'll say you can't polish a turd. So if it's bad liquid to start with, you can't make it good liquid and vice versa. But yeah, all that science and experiments that go on behind the scenes, and that's why I think when Harlan says, I haven't made it yet, we know what we're doing and we know what we've done for 200 years in mash bills, but you're constantly pushing boundaries to ask what if. And I think any distillery that isn't, you make a style, but if you're resting on your laurels, you'll be overtaken pretty quickly because you constantly have to push. Even with consumers, flavours change. When you think of what whiskies were 50 years ago to what they are now and the nuances and the flavour profiles, whiskey 50, 100 years ago, some of it you wouldn't even drink because you wouldn't feel that it had any sort of flavour. It'd be like terps. And so yeah, it has wood management, pressure, everything that goes with it. Basically creates these sort of flavour profiles, and I don't think we've ever had it so good. And it's really interesting if you get old bottles of Scotch from the 50s and 60s and try it to today, even the same brand, even pre-prohibition bourbons, if you've ever had a chance, half of them you just wouldn't drink.
Well, we had one at the weekend at the whiskey show.
What one was it?
I can't remember. I think it was 1913.
Yeah.
Dathan and everyone had it under the store. He didn't tell me what it was till I tried it. Oh, I nearly kicked him in the head. It was that vile. It was just disgusting.
But again, if there's no other option during prohibition and it's medicinal, you're like, I'd rather have something than nothing.
I used to drink K-cider.
Well,
We had that one.
I know I had that. That was very good. I know it's actually.
Old Fitzgerald.
This was under Nathan's table on an N10. They just had a glass. 1913, wasn't it?
Yeah, but that old Fitz would have been, I assume, out of Stitz or Weller at that point. So 35 to 75. So if it was just on the end of or at the start of it.
Yeah, he didn't like it. He gave him mine.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Palates change.
Right.
Palates change. Efficiencies. As soon as we get a yield of corn, and I know this as well from Scotch and Irish. As soon as you get a barley that yields a percentage of starch, scientists are then going, well, what about next year's yield? So you'll move from a strain of something called Proximo, and then they'll change the strain because it's all about efficiencies of getting as much sugar, because it becomes about yield and it becomes economies of scale. So it constantly change. And again, 20, 30 years time, a really good way of doing it if you want to buy a bottle of Buffalo Trace buy more than one a year, but buy one every year, stick a year on it, and over 20 years, taste it from the first year you do it to the last. Because when you know a brand, side by side, you would never pick them as different. But if you try the first and the last, we'd like to think the consistency is there, but you'll get an understanding as to how much products can change. You take a bottle of Jameson from the 60s to now, totally different liquid, although the brand is still the same. And there's probably people that have gone, well, Jameson's my drink, and always has been for 50 years, but it's a totally different liquid to what you're drinking. So yeah, constantly changing, constantly researching and experimenting to try and improve the consumer
Are
profile.
Buffalo trying to add any more to the core range? Like a new product that's priced that we can afford? Because
Well, you can afford all of them, it's just we don't have enough to sell.
Because you do so many that people don't know is yours, like you say, Benchmark.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of bottles of foolproof Benchmark. It's absolutely stunning.
Yeah, so there are different levels we're trying to bring in. We own a brand called Early Times, which is sort of entry level, but we're starting to bring that in.
And I know you pass that on to other people.
So yes is the reason, but I think when you take a brand like Weller, which is a core, first and foremost, it's about trying to get more of that.
So if you're selling enough of it already, it's hard to just.
We're in a really strange position because people want our liquid, and supply just doesn't meet demand. So whatever we produce, people want it. It drives up the secondary market, and that becomes a bit of an issue. What you don't want to do is get to a point where you're not building brands globally, where your supply exceeds demand, and then you've just got a very expensive lake of whiskey that you can't shift. So we have so many brands, as you know. I mean, under 100 quid, we've probably got 30 different SKUs. But being able to try and find a place for all of them. I was with a sort of leading grocer this morning, and they're like, our planogram's so big. If you've got 10 bourbons on your shelf, something has to be really good at a price point to take something off. Yeah. So this is why we work with the independent retailer, because that's where we can test and learn and try different things. So it's not necessarily a bourbon, it's a blended whiskey, but you'll see a new product coming called Traveller. So it's with Chris Stapleton. So he blended it with Harlem.
Tipples have got it already, haven't they?
Yeah, it started to come in. So again, that's around about sort of 30 quid. Done really well in America, but obviously in America, Buffalo Trace is on allocation, Eagle Rare's on allocation.
And he's quite well known.
What
was his input in it? Because he's teetotalist and he doesn't drink at all.
No, that he does drink.
Does he drink?
Yeah.
Because he did stop
He
drinking,
has to say, doesn't it?
Yeah.
have to go.
But his name's on the bottle, so his name's on the bottle. He signed it. He's blended it with Harlan. So we did a lot of work with him initially on E.H. Taylor, like a charitable piece with him, and that flew.
I had a bottle a couple of months ago. I got a whole bottle.
He's from Kentucky. I mean, it's sippable. It's meant to be mixed. It's almost an entry level to get people into Buffalo Trace as a distillery to understand what we do. But things like Early Times, things like Traveller, Weller Special Reserve comes in and becomes an everyday. So before you know it, we'll have 7 or 8 brands from 15 quid to 30 quid that aren't allocated, that basically is there as a ladder for everyone to try what they like. And the idea is that you've got 3 flavour profiles to say what do you like, and then it's a case of going up the different trees based on what there is. But yeah, stick with, there's more and more liquid coming. It's just trying to, we need enough to flood the market to stop the secondary market. And that's the challenge at the minute. But we'll get there.
So moving on to number 5 on your tasting chart. So having tasted 2 wheated expressions from the Van Winkle selection, we're moving on to what we have is the Buffalo Trace Antique collection. So each year, is it November in America? Yeah, November in America, we get it about January, February, March time in the UK. There's 5 releases of, there's 3 barrel strength and then 2 kind of significantly older expressions of some core lines. So you have Eagle Rare 17, excuse me, and Sazerac 18. So Sazerac Rye here is 6 years old, the expression is 18, and Eagle Rare is 10 years old and the 17. Whereas with the 3 that we get, because it's Friday, we're going to knock everyone's socks off. We've got 3 expressions from 2023 release that are all uncut and unfiltered barrel strength. So number 5, William Larue Weller, which is 66.8% in ABV. It's 12 years 6 months in age. If I'm not mistaken. 12.3 or 12.6?
12 and a half-ish.
Call it 12 and a half.
Might be a month or 2.
And kind of, as Liam said, around, you know, William Larue was kind of the pioneer for wheated bourbon. Pappy worked with him and followed a little bit later. And I think, you know, without overdoing what we've talked about already, having Weller at a very sensible price into trade that, you know, we can have in bars and shops and sold at a reputable price, is kind of bringing Weller back into the very front line of some extremely high quality, you know, middle-aged, foolproof whiskey. So, yeah, this one is, for me, it's like cherry cola on the nose. But make your own way through it. I would suggest a drop of water for those that haven't had too much.
This is, sorry mate, this is one where I would take a sip of water and hold it in your mouth, and then take a sip of the whiskey, and you'll actually feel the increase in temperature. So it'll eliminate the ethanol, if you like, because it is quite big at 66.8, but you'll almost feel the liquid grow in warmth in your palate once you have the water. So it eliminates that initial heat, and then you get the flavour that starts to come through. So particularly with all these, particularly the cask strengths, I'd almost do that as a starter for 10 to prepare your palate. It's a really nice way of getting the flavour profile, and then you can build in, because we sort of do these tastings and then some people sip them and you go, oh, by the way, it's 66.8, and you see people go, it is a bit heavy. But again, as Miles alluded to earlier, I think even at these strengths, I don't think, there's something in the aging in Kentucky, and I think it is the arid nature of it, and the warmth, the interaction with the oak, that I don't get as big an ethanol kick off bourbons at 65 to 70 as I do off scotches, for example. So there's something in nature in terms of what happens with climate that changes that profile. If you do get it quite hot on the nose, a really simple way is just to blow in it. It will dissipate the ethanol, and it means you can get your nose in. But as I said, as a starter for cask strength, sip of water and drop it in, and you'll feel that exothermic, and you'll get the flavour, and then it's easier to approach it second time round.
Do you think that reduction of ethanol on the nose has just got directly involved with the higher cask influence?
I think it's the interaction between the heat and the cask. So obviously we char the casks on the inside. We can only use them once, so we use a char level 4, which is 55 seconds. That char is both additive and subtractive. So if you imagine as a distiller, it's extracting things and filtering things out of it, and yet it's also burning the sugars and vanillins in the wood to add into the liquid. So it does both, and there's something in that heat wood interaction for me that eliminates some of those top notes that you would get, for example, where there's more moisture in the air. Try it. Find a cask strength whiskey and do the same, and you almost sort of do get a bit more of a hit.
So just a question about Buffalo Trace's cask generally. Do you guys have a preferred area of the United States to source your white oak? Or
Yeah, so we've recently, we used to use independent stave company. We've recently bought our own cask management. We bought our own cooperage, if you like. So yeah, all controlled. We know exactly what we want. There, the staves are dried for 6 to 12 months. They're done under spec. It's as I said, a 55-second char. We were just in Missouri as well, working with another brand called Ben Holiday. They're a char level 3, so slightly less. Everyone will have a different spec, and effectively, I think it's in the US where it probably has most influence, because then once we've used it once and it goes to Scotland or it goes to Ireland, you go to any distillery there or any warehouse, there'll be Jack, there'll be Woodford, there'll be Buffalo. They're not fussed because all they want is the seasoning in the cask.
Yes.
For us, it's very much about that char level and our liquid going in. So it is the flatbeds. I mean, you can only use it once. It was there to prevent or to provide the logging industry with an industry, and it was unionised so that people didn't go out of work. That's effectively why it was used once. But also think of it in terms of wood management. It's literally like tea. If you make a cup of tea with a tea bag and then make it again and again and again, it's diminishing sort of values as you use it more and more and more. So we would say we char it and we take all the vanilla flavour out from the start, but then that's why Scotch and Irish distilleries, you'll get second and third fill because they want varying levels. So they'll take a first fill, it's had bourbon in it, they'll fill it up, and that would be the bulk of their flavour profile. And then they'll change second and third as they get older to get different styles and different flavours, or take a port cask or sherry or whatever. But yeah, it's all under our spec. It comes in at a certain moisture level, so we know exactly what moisture's in the oak. Again, 200 years of know-how, you sort of know where you're at. But this is also why we don't, you can go and look on any bourbon generally, and you'll get the mash bill, the ratios, the recipe. We purposely don't do that. People guess, and there's sort of sites out there where you can guess what it is, but if you've been doing it for 200 years and you've got a bit of a head start, why tell someone else what you're doing? Go and work it out for yourself. So yeah, in the distillery, we're always playing around with mash bills, and there's different profiles. So if you take our mash bill one that makes, as Miles said, from Benchmark, Buffalo Trace, Eagle Rare, George T. Stagg, and then up the road at Barton, it's a slightly different mash bill, but that makes 1792. So the mash bill is sort of key to what you do, but then it's about showcasing. Do you want to show off age? Do you want to show off ABV? So I think, for me, in being around distilleries, Buffalo Trace's strength is its versatility.
Yeah.
We don't want to have the same flavour. We make different mash bills, we'll go into different warehouses to create differences in liquid, and that means you can create multi-brand. You will have other distilleries, so once our barrels lay down, they don't move. We want differences. You will have other distilleries that will move barrels around the warehouse to eradicate those differences. But that's why they will probably only produce 2, 3 or 4 SKUs. We're the other way, where we're producing lots of SKUs, because you don't have to like everything we make, but I guarantee we make something you do like.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of way we're working on it, and then it allows you to sort of build.
It's a weird flip on mass production, that is, really, because mass production normally you're doing to make cheap, whereas you're doing it to get.
Well, yeah, and I think but the mass production bit, the more Buffalo Trace we sell, the more allows you to do everything else. And I can only talk from where I've worked before. Selling lots of Jameson allows you to do the pot still, and the nice stuff. You'll never get, I think 2 things, you'll never get a mass-produced product with an age statement, because it means as a blender or as a finance controller, you're sitting there for 12 years because you can't do anything. That's your benchmark, pardon the pun, but that's your entry level. Whereas I think if you look at brands that do it really well, their leading brand is non-age statement. So you can change the blend, as long as the flavour's the same, you can play around with age, but as soon as you put an age on it, it has to be that young. So I think mass-produced non-age statement is the way to go, to then be able to experiment and play around with the good stuff. And I think that's what we do very well. The plan is, off that one mash bill, Buffalo Trace, Eagle Rare, and even lower than that, you go Fireball and Southern Comfort. Not that it's the same mash bill, but that allows you to do, Fireball's an 11 million case brand. It's the same size as Jameson globally, but that allows us to do all the nice stuff.
Mainly bought by Andrew Watson. Andrew well know.
I think the other thing is, like, we don't really talk about it a lot, is being privately owned means that all the Warehouse X experiments, I wouldn't want to say millions of dollars, but I'm probably not far off of stuff that just happens just to go in a bit of a playbook, which if you were answering to a shareholder community, you wouldn't be able to do it.
Well, that's exactly why, 2 years ago we didn't release Stagg in the antique collection. As a private business, we said that is not good enough, so we didn't release it. It was just a year in 2022, I think, you'll probably correct me, I think it was 22, where we didn't release a Stagg.
I think it's 21.
Was it 21, 22?
Yeah.
But as a massive corporation, you can't afford to do that because your shareholders are going, well, hold on a minute, it's a couple of million quid you're losing there. I want my money.
Did they think the 2019 was good enough then? That was the lower proof one.
Well, that's that's down to Drew. So Drew and Harlan sit there. So in Drew's eyes, yes.
I didn't mind it, but it didn't taste like a George T. Stagg for me.
Yeah, and I think that's the idea is with the Stags or with the antique
obviously he's a better judge than I would be.
but I think the idea with the antique collection, although you're trying to keep to a flavour profile, you're not keeping to a DNA.
You can't have it too similar,
no,
because it's the same as
otherwise someone goes the same as last year, so you actually need the difference.
Yeah.
And you'll see, like some years, you'll get Stags at 70% other years, but some people love that, other consumers don't. So it is in the eye of the beholder. Some like it, some don't. But I think if it's generating discussion, that's the whole point. You wouldn't get a year where it'd be 66.4 and 66.4. It would definitely vary. That's the whole point, based on warehouse and the resources we've got at hand. So I think although there is a signature flavour profile of what George T. Stagg is, as a 15-year-old minimum,
2019's got that still, but yeah, still got that dark cherry.
Yeah, I think that's dark cherry is very sort of synonymous with Buffalo Trace. It is a flavour profile that sticks, but each their own. It does change.
I think actually tasting some of these does show you just how fantastic your regular core range is, though, because to me, obviously these are exceptional.
You can come again.
Collect your refund on the way.
You're not first pick.
They're not a million miles away from the Eagle Red 10.
No, I mean,
that just shows you what a good.
I'll be biased, but I drink Eagle Red 10 every day.
Yeah.
I mean, bang for buck, value for money. I think it's exceptional liquid, and I don't just mean in bourbon. I mean in whiskey.
Yeah.
I think it is.
But I think these do show what a good product that is, because that's not a million miles away from you.
Yeah. So next whiskey, sorry, my foolproof plan has already gone. So next whiskey is going to be number 2, which is the Van Winkle 13-year-old rye. So yeah.
Which number was this? Sorry.
Number 2.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for everybody keeping up. So yeah, this, I've not worked within sort of selling allocated products for our company for that many years, but we've not always had this every year, have we? Excuse me. So
we've had it 2 out of the 4 I've been in.
There you go.
And every year.
So we have, obviously with the 10, 12, 15, 20 and 23, varying numbers, but at least we get it. The 13, which is a rye, which is obviously completely different from all the other SKUs whereby it's wheated. This is a rye, so dominant grain is going to be rye. We've got, this is one I won't talk too much because I think it's important to taste because it completely polarises versus Saz 18, even Sazerac rye 6-year-old. 47.8% ABV, so back down, have a cracker, bit of cheese. But please do, so if you haven't drunk a lot of rye from our distillery before, like I say, the 6, even some of the sort of higher rye bourbons. This one, for me, is kind of that marriage of everything you know about sort of nice, sweet bourbon, balanced with a rye grain and a flavour that doesn't overtake everything. So it's just a little bit more all in one place and balanced rather than quite as extremely spicy. So you may have different palates. I've said this back in December, I've spent too many years eating too many sweets, so I love corn and sweet, I can get on board with it. Rye takes me a little bit longer, but I do get there eventually. So I think for this one, have a taste and sort of let us know what you think, really.
Yeah, I think the 13 rye is really interesting because I always get dill pickle on this.
Yeah.
It's like McDonald's quarter pounder gherkin. That's what I get on the nose of this. It's just.
I only had it a couple of times over here. I get like that tangy. It's obviously got the rye taste, not as rye as like say a Whistle Pig rye, which is proper.
You'll get that.
Yeah, you do get it on it.
And the funny thing is,
tangy taste.
So we talk about the antique collection, and we go up to a Saz 18, or we go up to a Rye 18. Rye is a bit like wheat. I mean, it's horrendous to distill because it turns into a porridge. It's a nightmare to clean. It's just not a nice grain to work with. So when it's very young, at sort of 6 years, you do get that vibrant, spicy, and you'll taste it in the next glass. But it's like white pepper spice, really dominant, really sort of in your face. As rye mellows, it actually gets a lot softer. So this is, I think the Van Winkle 13 is released because we know we do the standard 6. We know we've got an 18, and 13 sort of is a middle ground for it. And I actually think you get that softness. If you ever get a chance to try Sazerac 18, there's a subtlety to it that out of context you might not even think it's rye because the spice is so in the background that it's really soft and there's a lot more going on. So I think with this it is a lot softer to what we anticipate rye to be. So keep what's the handy is glass 4. So it might be an idea now we're on Pappy and you're drinking it, but while we're doing this, so then you can have a break to go on to the last few. But you've got Thomas Handy as 4, which is 6-year-old cask strength, and that will be really heavy in spice straight off the bat. So what we're trying to do is, as I said, in terms of being able to offer brands, you don't want them all to be the same. So it's about showing the differences of what the grain can do, and that's exactly what the antique collection does. We're trying to showcase in Drew's eyes and as a distillery the best position for what we think it should be. So that's why you've got Thomas Handy as a 6-year-old cask strength rye, big up front, lots of pepper spice, and then the subtlety of 18. So it's almost the two opposite ends of the spectrum, but we're trying to showcase what they are. So yeah, Handy. Do you want to talk about Handy? So Handy's 4, but it's almost a sort of compare and contrast between the younger, higher ABV to the softer, more mellow Pappy.
Just before, because I do forget quite a lot of stuff. For anybody that takes one of the BTACs home, if you haven't looked online, there's a release statement. So every year you get a letter that tells you everything from which warehouse, which floor. And again, if you're building a bit of a collection, it's always quite nice.
Do we never get the letters over in the UK?
We don't.
They're served in the cases. So there's a letter in every case.
Okay. But
But it's whether a retailer gets a case of 3 because we don't get enough. But you can go online and print them.
I've tried to get one before, but no.
I'll ask. I mean, if they come in terms of cases, there's a letter in every case of
Or if
3.
we just take a case next time.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. if I could sell it by the case, it'd be a lot easier. The interesting thing on it, what I always love looking at, is the evaporation rate, because it really gives you an indication as to
Was that
why
one
there's
on there
not
as
massive
well?
amounts
It all
of it.
shows you. I know I've seen it before, and it shows like how much it's got.
But yeah,
I've seen an Eagle Rare. I've seen Eagle Rare 17 as like 91% evaporation.
Just going to tell you all the different warehouse numbers.
Yeah. and that's where
Floor level warehouse.
So like all of the BTAC will tell you like Independence
Maybe,
Day.
yeah, certainly since I've been here.
I've got a letter from Weller. Well, I haven't got a bottle anymore.
They're brilliant, especially when you do tastings, you print them off and have a look. But
Yeah, I think just, whiskies now, it's just about being as transparent as possible, and that's exactly what that letter does. It tells you we're not hiding anything, that's exactly what it is. And that's the key. I think people believe in things when they've got full visibility.
You go back to the.
So, last one before a bit of a break. Just talk a little bit about Thomas H. Handy. So, just quick, who's been to Buffalo Trace Distillery in the room? Oh, we've got to start taking more people.
We're going next year, hopefully.
Yeah.
We're planning a road trip.
Okay.
If we tell them you sent us, we get
BBS.
They'll probably charge you. It's free normally. If we
Like
say
your
they'll
golf
charge
club. Tell them Liam sent you.
Won't be cold.
But yeah, well, we'll touch it now. But if you do get to go, obviously all the tours at Buffalo Trace are free. But I think having spent some time, we were very fortunate to have Freddie Johnson do a sort of guided tour for us. Who's been, his descendants back in his family that used to work at the distillery. He's probably in his 70s now, and he showed us, various nooks and crannies that, we were fortunate to see. But standing on the sort of bank of the Kentucky River, and I'll be completely honest, this was a factor that I just kind of, we talk about it, we don't really think about it, but that was the M25, the M6
of the day.
A something. I was trying to remember some of the roads I used today, and that was, can you imagine back, a couple of hundred years ago, loading up a raft with your crown jewels, as it were, and just thinking that you could just poodle on down there to New Orleans to flog it to somebody without someone going, I've seen them do that before, I've seen them do it again, they do it every week. So obviously there was all sorts of disasters that would happen. But yeah, so the rye whiskey that we're going to have now, named after Thomas H. Handy, who's one of the first bartenders in New Orleans. So all of the old kind of coffee houses, saloons that previously would have used cognac in a Sazerac or cocktails, Thomas H. Handy was synonymous with being one of the first bartenders to use rye whiskey. So typically, like George T. Stagg, Colonel E.H. Taylor, Weller, Pappy, we don't have a one-size-fits-all brand name like a Jack Daniels, which is a perfect good example. My dad can go into Sainsbury's, we'll see the different coloured labels, he knows what it is. Everything that comes out of the distillery is bottled and named after something completely different, which is fantastic for us, but it doesn't do a great job in tying it all together. So yeah, Thomas H. Handy was, it's kind of, Sazerac House is obviously based in New Orleans, and the sort of cocktails have gone full circle since that day. But this skew, outside of the whiskey that you're going to drink, is just a sort of nod to, it needs a bartender, it needs someone to create something before you can actually have a market for it. You can make as much whiskey and have as much stolen off a barge as you like, but you need people to sort of get on board and utilise it. So that kind of gets a little bit overlooked from a BTAC point of view. So this one, I have to cross-reference on proof, 62.45% ABV. So this is 6 years, 3 months. And everyone goes, it's not old, do I buy it, do I spend my money on it? And this one, I don't do a bucket load of tastings whereby we're doing kind of Saz rye through to Thomas H. Handy, but it's certainly one of the antique collections that when we do trade or even consumer tasting, it always resonates. You don't have to love it, you don't have to necessarily even like it, but it always resonates because of the flavour profile. So like I said, corn, you switch your dominant grain, it's rye. Rye's got that spice. This time in contact with wood, but also at the ABV. This is pretty, for me it's pretty punchy, so a drop of water, like Liam says, take a sip, or even just let it kiss your lips at the start, and then go back to it and almost sort of start again from the second sip. But yeah, this stands out quite well from the 5. Unfortunately, we haven't got all 5 tonight, but it really has its own place. So have a taste of it.
Yeah, try it in isolation and then compare it to glass 2, and you'll appreciate the softness versus that spicy nature up front. So as I said, what we're trying to do and what we're trying to showcase all the time is to be able to give everyone, based on the grain they like, how old they like it, what ABV they like, to have multiple expressions that can pick whatever your go-to is.
That's quite interesting. I read rye and straight away my head thinks spicy.
Yeah, and funny, spice is, I had this conversation today, people are forever trying to say, well look, what's rye? As soon as you say spicy, people take spice in a bad way because they think chili spice or heat, not clovey, bacon spices, apple pie type.
I think spicy.
So spice is a bad word, but it's the easiest descriptor to tell someone what it is.
That's what I meant. As
Yeah.
soon as I see rye, I think
Peppery,
the whole spice,
vibrant, yeah.
whole fragrance spices. So I was surprised at the Pappy 13
because of the softness.
So I think,
Yeah.
there was more sort of, I'll write down. But that's the pickly, and there was a bit of that sweetness. The spice that I was expecting.
When you
exactly what I thought I'd get on this
even
one.
trying standalone standard baby Saz, on the nose of baby Saz at 45%. My tasting notes are rubbish. Any of you who've heard me before, you'll know, but it noses like a bag of Haribo, like jelly sweets. There's a candied sweetness to it, almost like an orangey marmalade. But then, because it's the total flip to Mash Bill 1 and Buffalo Trace, where you're going sweetness into spice, Sazerac is the total opposite, where you're going rye spiciness up front into soft fruit. So you go from that candied sweetness, and you're right, there is a sweetness to rye, but you know it's a well-balanced product because you go spice into fruit. Yeah. So it's a total flip because the raw material is total opposites in terms of ratio. But when it's put as baby Saz at car strength, that spice is even more dominant because you've got the heat of the alcohol to go through it. As it gets to 13 and you drop the ABV, it's more balanced and it becomes a background note, and like you said, it becomes a softer, probably more baking spice. And then when you get to 18, it's so subtle in the background, you're actually sort of, it's like looking down a hallway and putting a torch on, you're like, is it there? But you know it is, but it's just, again, it's us as a distillery trying to showcase what age ABV does to that grain. And that's what we're constantly trying to do. So whatever you like, there's always that flavour tree to experiment. That's the goal.
So the good thing I like about rye is you get the two options for me. You always get the handy kind of taste, or the whistle pig, which is like proper green grass type of thing. And it's like you've got them both the same product. Obviously not, but you know what I mean. They're so different.
But again, it will be down. I mean, it's how you get terroir in wine. Yeah. You know, you go into Vermont rye, different weather conditions, different climate, different soil, as opposed to coming down, I think where Minnesota rye is where the bulk of our comes from. But you know, you're two totally different, you might as well be the other side of the world, but it just goes to show you that you do get terroir from whiskey, and everyone will talk, you know, if we took the stills from Buffalo Trace and put them in Birmingham, even if the still's the same and you use the same grain, so everything about it is exactly the same, we took grain from the US and distilled, you would get a different liquid. Because every dent on a still, climate, temperature, everything makes such a difference. Yeah. You know, if you distill, do you get more reflux? So is there more contact with copper? So it refluxes back. So everything can change. So there's so much terroir in whiskey that it's unique to its location. And I'm sure you've had scotches before when you're in, you know, a warehouse by the sea. Is it an open warehouse? Is it sea saline air coming through that will penetrate? Is it a closed warehouse? There's so many different things that give you that profile. But what we know is what we can do with rye based on warehouse from our location. And that's the idea of why you get different brands. It's what people like. And once you know what you like, you can go there. But there's a whole world of brands to go and find what you like.
It seems weird that Handy, about 5-6 years ago, seemed to be the one people weren't interested in yet. It was so good. Now, obviously, the people realised it was really good.
I actually think it's because people are now starting to realise it's car strength handy, so it's also the one that we generally get the most of.
Yeah.
So I think it's arguably more accessible, which is why more people are getting to grips with it. But again, I love what it does, and side by side against rye, you really do, you get it. And I mean, when we're doing these tastings on a sort of daily basis with different people, rye is really polarizing. Just doing sort of surveys, it generally tends to be like 1 in 5. And we're doing it with bartenders, we're doing it with people like yourselves, consumers that like whiskey. So, you know, you're going, you're foodies, you're buyers, you're into different things. And that's only 1 in 5 that likes rye. The other 4 go, no, not for me. So rye is a really difficult grain for the consumer to get, which is why I think you have the likes of older ryes to soften it, because it's quite upfront and you like it or you don't. So.
Where do people sit between, obviously, the Van Winkle at 13 lower proof and Thomas H. Handy is
Two totally different drinks.
Yeah.
Both nice, but totally different.
totally different.
I'm
Too
on
far
Van
apart to
Winkle.
choose.
Oh yeah,
I'm
yeah.
two of those.
See, for me, the Van Winkle are like very fragrant woods, like a lot of pine, a
Yeah.
lot of like this
Cleaner.
cleaner, definitely. And I think the Handy's quite savoury on the palate, which is not something you're getting much from the Van Winkle. But the delivery is just completely
Rich, yeah.
different. Yeah, but both excellent.
I actually quite like the journey you get on the Van Winkle.
Yeah.
Because it's got that sweetness, then you get the elements of rye, and there is a little sort of a peppery finish, so it's a nice journey, whereas the Handy's,
It jumps to 90
it's like
very
bang
quickly.
out.
There's a music
So I
note, isn't
like
there?
the journey of the Van Winkle.
Cool.
But that's why, randomly when we go through the others, nose back to the 13 and even smelling the glass if it's empty, you'll get the softness of it.
What's the so you said like every little bit controls. So when they go to like the mash bill on the grains, how controlled are they? Like, are they down to like the kilogram? Are they down to like the, because obviously they would do mash bills by the tonnage.
Yeah.
How
The cooks are down to,
like
they're consistent.
how?
No, I want to remember it's being recorded.
No, so I don't want to know the mash bill. Like what I'm saying is like how, like to what decimal do they actually control it down to?
You'd be down to like 3 decimal points.
I think they
Oh, so like down to almost
I
the
think
grain.
they,
Yes.
I think they just wing it.
Yeah.
They get right.
I know.
No,
Just in the previous company I worked with, there was a guy called Tim Stones who was it was for Beefeater gin. So if ever you know Beefeater, the master distiller is a guy called Desmond Payne. Got an OBE, been distilling Beefeater for 40 years, and Tim was working with him. So he'd been a brand ambassador, but was going into distillery, and he had to go in and weigh botanicals. 2.00, whatever it was, juniper. And he sort of quipped to Desmond and said, "Oh, Desmond, what would you say if I was sort of out a bit on the juniper?" And Desmond turned around and said, excuse my language, but Desmond turned around and said, I'd say you'd have a fucking very cavalier attitude to making gin. And that's the sort of level that people have. No, but that's the level, because you assume...
Has to be, doesn't it?
Sorry?
Has to be.
Yeah, there is no room for complacency. It's like if you've made a batch for 100 years and it's going the same way, because there's so many multiples that can happen and variances once it goes into cask. So the distiller's job ultimately, not only is it to make good distillate, but it's consistent distillate that tastes the same, at exactly the same ABV, with exactly the same water source going in at 62.5 every single time. So we talk a lot, and you hear this a lot, if you get small distillery opens up and everyone's like, that's the most amazing liquid I've ever had. Brilliant, well done to you, now produce it again. The best distilleries produce liquid consistently, time and time and time again. It creates a flavour profile that the consumer recognises and sticks with. There's no point making an amazing liquid and not being able to replicate it. Yeah. And that, ultimately, for me, that's the point. The distillers that are around for hundreds of years have done that consistently because they know what they're at. Someone that does something new, and it could be chance, it could be luck, it could be anything, but you're only as good as your last batch. So if you've got no consistency, that is key. So yeah, down to the nth degree in terms of, and we're not even talking, in terms of weighing grains, but you're talking like nth degree in terms of temperature when things are added or things are cut. It's consistent. If you've ever seen hydrometers or been in a lab, there's done differently now, but back in the day when you're looking at hydrometers, your conversion book is sort of that thick based on temperature in the distillery of the day. So there's so many different factors and nothing is taken to chance. So everything is worked out to be as consistent as
That's what I'm thinking of, like the F1 level data of like, you have such huge controls over like the speed that it gets added to the...
Well, as I said, you look at a mash house or a still house, winter to summer, alcohol expands. So how do you control that on a basis where there's such fluctuation in temperature? And that's what you're constantly evaluating day in, day out. So as I said, you go to Scotland and it looks quite romantic on small pot stills and how you can do it. But even nowadays, if you go to Glenfiddich or Glenmorangie or wherever, your sets of like 16 sets of stills, like it's a huge operation now. So it's as much as they always say that distilling is a science and blending is an art. That's that's basically the way they look at it. So your distillate has to be consistent.
Is it like roboticized then, or is it people like doing...
It's people, but everything will be backed with a DNA. I mean, there are certain companies that you can use something called rounding, where you put a DNA in terms of a sugar content. No one can taste it, but it's your DNA, because I think there's so many brands and liquids in certain parts of the world that can be ripped off. So, I mean, to give you an idea, you know, we didn't keep any of the foils on these, did we? But we've started putting tags on our BTAC so that we can tell you if it's genuine. So literally, there's a tag in it. I can scan a code, so it will tell you whether it's been opened. It'll tell you, so we know whether it's our liquid. But counterfeit becomes such an issue that you need to be able to have DNA. So most things are done by pallet, but you know, we saw a piece of machine. I think they're about £3.5 million a go, that will identify every compound within a flavour profile. So you have a total DNA in the background to be able to judge it. And that's why, you know, everything
down to like parts per trillion.
Yeah.
So imagine, you know, I joke about me having bad palate for sweets. You know, I can taste physiolasis to parts per trillion. I can also do it for whiskey, but it's
that's what
so specific.
We'll show you on the bottles. I mean, every bottle has a lot number, so we know the day it was produced, we know the time, we know the bottling line. So if there is an issue, we can revert back to a point in time and investigate what that issue is. So it's consistency is key. Even though we're trying to offer different flavour profiles, but it's trying to be as consistent.
Did we talk about the tasting panel? I can't remember.
No.
So, only because I listened to it last week. So, for every pick, every barrel pick, every blend of whiskey, 5 people have to sit around a tasting panel and taste, whether it's Buffalo Trace, Blanton's, whatever. And if one person says that doesn't meet a flavour, we talk about like setting a benchmark of Eagle Rare. One person doesn't think it fits, it doesn't get signed off. And Harlan Wheatley, what's he been there 20 odd years, was saying that people think, oh, you know, so we talk about the Stagg that didn't get bottled, we talk about, you know, a batch that doesn't get signed off, doesn't get thrown away. He said 4 barrels or 4 picks in 20 years were destroyed. The rest were repositioned, whether it's spend more time in contact with wood, whether it's going to something younger age to build profile. But for sort of 20 odd years, I mean, I don't make anything, I don't produce anything, but 4 barrels over 20 odd years that were just like, no, they're not right. That's pretty, I think it's still pretty impressive. It's a good ratio of success. So. But it's not, you know, we sat and did a Lazy Susan tasting, and there was just random people walking in, just literally obviously had a profile that they were to meet, and they almost come in, go bang, 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 bang around the table, different tables. We were sort of like, what the hell's going on here? But to see it, you know, we talk about it, but to actually watch people go, oh yeah, they're just doing a single barrel pick, they need to make sure it's right. It's like, it's nice because the scale's one thing, we talk about billions and millions of dollars, but if you don't have the control at the start point, what's the point? Like, you can't just let it go. So that, from personally, was a real, I wouldn't say an eye-opener, but it was a bit of a,
it's amazing to see. When you're on tasting panels, I mean, you can taste in blue glass, you're told not to wear deodorant, aftershave, you know, on some, sounds disgusting, but don't even brush your teeth because it's the first thing you do in the morning. So some distilleries will be like, right, 12 o'clock, you come in late that day because the first thing you do is the tasting panel, but you can't have any smells that interfere with it. So at Buffalo Trace, we actually have a system that extracts the air out to keep the air neutral within the room. So there's nothing to distract you of going consistency of what it is. So it's a scientific lab. That's where it's got to now to create that consistency. So
it's like being at a casino in Vegas. keeps you away, keeps you alive.
But without the smell.
Without the money.
There's plenty of money.
So that there brings us to the conclusion. That's 5 drams. We've done wheat and we've done rye. I can't believe I'm reading it off this, but let's take a break. Anyone that wants to have 10 minutes, cigarette, chat, let's take a break, and then we're going to come back. We're going to try so Stagg, which is a sort of triannual release, three per year. We've got kind of the most recent that we've got in this country to taste, which is not in your glasses, so we'll sort that out while you're having a break, and then we're going to taste George T. Stagg, and then we have one other for you as well. So take some time, have a chat, have
some more.
Please eat the crackers.
You're not drinking, so you know.
Well, I'm taking it then. My favourite, as you know.
Perfect. So I do apologise. It's not going to be the Nickolls and Perks stag pick. Now, obviously, with the nature of these products, as the gents have alluded to, supply and demand, you know, there's a very clear imbalance there. And we suspect the same is going to happen with our stag pick. These things do sort of evaporate when they hit the shelves.
Fair assumption.
So wanted to reassure you basically that, you know, as that was supposed to be part of what we're enjoying tonight, you were supposed to have the opportunity to get it. You will get right to first refusal, basically. We will reach out to all of you, you will still get that opportunity. So it's not going to be the Nickolls and Perks stag pick, but nevertheless it's going to be a very, very nice stag, the latest one, and I'll allow the gents to explain all the virtues of it. So there you go, guys.
Yeah, very delicately talked about there.
But thanks to NMP for the offer.
Absolutely.
For free as well.
Take home only.
Heavily discounted. Inconvenient.
So, just going sort of 360 back to kind of, to be honest, where a lot of our tastings would start is with this mash bill, this recipe that is, you know, by law we know minimum 51% corn, rye of malted barley. Drew, for anyone that's ever done a tasting, likes to get his little pack out and talk about time and grains, and he wants you to taste. Sorry, he wants you to sort of know what you're going to taste and what it should taste like. Don't tell someone what you should be getting candied fruit. Know the dominant grain. Know that build your own profile. I think that's what Liam was saying about where we're talking about wheat and rye. We want people just to come away from not so much tastings like this, but our brand. So when we do things like the Midlands Whiskey Fest, or to give some people some more knowledge around sort of the more core lines, so that they can then, like you say, go on a journey, spend money, time, energy, blood, sweat and tears, getting bottles that you want because you know you like the profile. Thomas H. Hanley is a really good example. There's a lot of people that you could offer it at retail and they'd go, oh yeah, I've got to buy it, and they take it home, they don't enjoy it. So,
Or don't open it.
Or don't open it. So yeah, the Nickolls and Perks stag pick, again, we don't do very many of those sort of annually, so that's something to look forward to. Stag, and this is where my slightly sort of forgetful mind is, previously as a junior on the label, you'd have different release ABVs, and certainly I struggled, customer services really struggled to work out what was what, but now we're doing 3 releases a year under the sort of year of release A, B and C. So 23C for everyone that's still switched on Friday night, 2023 sort of fall release, so end of the year, 62.95%, and I was fortunate enough to pick up with my own money the 24A, which hopefully we'll obviously get at some point, and the difference is quite measured, but not too much. So each one creates its own profile. It's uncut and unfiltered. Is it 7 years or 6?
It goes up now. It's up to 9.
Up to 9.
9 is where Stagg sits.
So when we're going to go next is George T. Stagg, which is the same mash bill, same recipe. And I always, certainly for the predominant customers we speak to, it's like the science of getting that neutral grain spirit off the still. Harlan will talk to you about that till he's blue in the face, but like it all starts there, coming off the still, going into barrel at 62.5%. It's then what happens to it. So for us, I think Stagg this one is kind of, everyone has their own personal favourite. It's kind of not Marmite-esque, but everyone has tasted one that they love, and then they taste through the range and they'll find a different way. Whereas I think with the BTAC, because it's slightly scarcer, people kind of think they should love everything and then they work their own way back. But this is one that, taste it on your own profile. But yeah, so again, higher proof. Like I don't personally think it quite drinks the proof, but
it doesn't drink it.
Yeah.
But this is one in terms of that Buffalo Trace cherry.
Yeah.
Again, if you drink the water and then take a sip, it's that cherry flavour that you'll get really dominant up front. And that's where you almost, this is one of those, particularly at this strength, you sit with a pipette and it's drop of water, drop of water, drop of water until you get to a point where you can sip it. But yeah, that water with that hit of alcohol initially is where I get that cherry bomb really up front. And I think around about 9 years at car strength is where you start to get that cherry profile. Not so much in Eagle Red 10 at 45, but the higher ABV is where it really starts to kick in, and that's very much a sort of BT staple, really.
And then just to sort of tie in Stagg and George T. Stagg, doing the history, I won't bore you to death. 1900 was the year that the distillery was named after George T. Stagg, so he's been a custodian of the distillery. He worked quite closely with E.H. Taylor, Colonel E.H. Taylor, which we'll taste at the end. We'll talk about him, but Stagg, again, it's all about honouring people that have kind of forged a bit of a pathway for what the liquids, we still taste every year a George T. Stagg. He was seen as a bit of a pioneer, and I think the junior, I don't know, I'm just surmising from what we've talked about, kind of degraded the liquid by just putting a junior on it every year. And the batch, again, for people that collect and buy and have stuff at home, it's lovely. You get each 3 years, each seasonal release, and it doesn't just say Stagg Junior. It's sort of a slight, well, quite significantly younger expression of something that is part of the antique collection. So this, we normally would do like a bit of a build up and go Eagle Rare and then up to something like this, but this is, like Liam says, classic Buffalo Trace Distillery, mash bill number 1, but at barrel proof. And didn't actually taste the Nickolls and Perks pick, but hopefully that one's comparable, if not significantly better.
Well, what I can say is, of course, you gave us a selection of a few barrels. Take this seriously. We did blind tastings with it quite a few times, and across all of us in our own independent tastings of it, and when we came together, we all unanimously picked the one barrel. Yeah. So yeah, we were excited. It is legitimately fantastic.
And that's kind of, Liam's done way more than I have, but with barrel picks, you sort of, obviously in an ideal world, proximity, people would come to America to do it, but at the moment we're doing it where we set the samples out. And I would say for me, certainly the ones I've done in the last year, it's, there's not much hanging around. It's like you'll have, if there's 4 people tasting it, 3 of them will be right on the cusp and quite quickly 4. You don't often go, oh, well, I kind of like that one. It's almost like the profile that you want to have. You have with Buffalo Trace. I mean, the difference between a couple of meters in a rick house on Buffalo Trace is just madness. You'd expect it to be kind of consistent, but the difference can be quite significant. So, yeah, fingers crossed that'll come out as they hoped, and that'll be here in the next sort of month or so. But this, 23C, so end of fall 2023. Taste and let me know what you think.
Are they same aging? So when you distill them out, so are they similar ages? So that like the A, Bs, and Cs, are they effectively always going to be
within a parameter?
Like years? So like
they're not always exactly the same. It's the same with the antique collection. They're never exactly the same.
So it's not like there's
Stagg
always
would be
12 summers. Like some might be different.
So like late 7s, 8s into very early 9s. So just for context, like Eagle Rare 17 of this year, bearing in mind you have to, you can't denounce a number. It has to be like the youngest liquid that you've got in it. Some of the Eagle Rare 17 this year was 19 years, 3 months old. If you think we did double Eagle very rare at 20 years old, quite a lot more money. So yeah, you picked up an Eagle Rare 17 this year, you've done really well. Whereas we tasted next year's one a couple of weeks ago, 17-1 or something like that, but excellent, really high quality, but kind of different. So
that's the 23 one.
Yeah, sorry, we just got the 19 years, 3 months.
It was good. I had that at Low Country.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
It was just, that reset what a 10 was for me in terms of like trying stuff. And
I think it's
really good.
Doing kind of Eagle Rare or Buffalo Trace, Eagle Rare, and then into something like 17, you'll go like quite significantly through the years. Whereas some, if you want my personal opinion, some of the Pappies, people like different things. 12 drinks great.
Keep you updated on the shipping.
You're all in your head, you're like, how much can you pay for it? 15 is a sweet spot, but I like 20 and 23, people think it's too over. It's all based on what you think.
About 23.
Yeah. They're a good example of having it to sell, people can turn up and drink it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I was very happy with that.
So, for anyone that's got any modicum of taste buds left, we're now going to move on to the last whiskey, which is number 6. Is that right? Yeah. excuse me, which is the George T. Stagg. So that is 15 years and 4 months, 67.5% ABV. So that for me gets to the point where it needs to be carefully managed. I've actually got one. Again, this is uncut and unfiltered. So this is Buffalo Trace, this is Eagle Rare, this is E.H. Taylor Small Batch, this is Eagle Rare 17. Same mash bill, same recipe. It's just about how much time, how much space in contact with wood. I did have a little look last night. I think the evaporation rate on the Stagg was something like 66%. Whereas if you,
Sorry, what was that?
15 years, 4 months, or 3 months. Luckily, you can tell if we're lying because it's all on the sheet. I think it was something like 66% evaporation on the Stagg.
It's strong for you.
Sazerac will be something lower, and the Eagle Rare 17, like Liam said, we've seen up to 91%. So it's boring, but at least if you advertise to my local, well, by the time you tip that thing open, there's not an awful lot.
It's got a better nose, but on the palate, you're the ones
so this, again, so Stagg for 8 or 9 years, George T. Stagg, what's that, another 6 years at least. This, for me, is one that drinks nowhere near its proof, and that sort of characteristic of Buffalo Trace, that real good dark cherry, like, well, what does light cherry look like and taste like? But anyway, cherry, there's a sweetness. If you haven't got the sweetness, it's then difficult to balance where the rye complex comes in. Time with wood, evaporation, I mean, it's rich, but it's weird. We did a predominantly on trade, so bars, restaurants came to taste this year's antique collection around the country, and they probably 4 out of the 6 locations is sort of their first or second choice, which is great because sometimes proof it just, you know what it's like. It's a bit like going to a wine tasting, long day, palate gets absolutely destroyed, whereas you kind of, admittedly, you taste it closer to the start rather than the end, but it picks up and people, and I think tying it into Eagle Rare, E.H. Taylor, it's the same flavour profile, it's the same mash bill. So, yeah, this year's release is pretty punchy. I think we've had it in the 70s before.
I've got one.
71, is it?
71 or 70.1 or something.
Yeah.
Can't remember which one it is, but it's very nice. That doesn't drink like 70%.
No, and again,
drinking
introducing you never. I joke about it, but I was given a Lagavulin at 18 years old, a bit of a cocky golfer. There you go, you can have one of those. You never want to drink it again. You wouldn't introduce your friends to that George T. Stagg, but you can take them on a journey. And I think starting at Buffalo Trace, yeah, and
have to be a good friend.
Tell them it's the same mash bill, it's the same. It starts its life, it doesn't come off the still and they go, that'll be George T. Stagg. It doesn't work like that. Flavour profile over time, barrels get picked, moved around, not moved around, but picked for certain things. So like Eagle Rare 17 and George T. Stagg are the same barrels. It's just whether they meet different criteria. So you have gone through wheat, rye, corn. So we would typically do corn, wheat, rye just because of the flavour profile. But because some of the proofs, everyone seems to be fairly chipper, but yeah, they're pretty high. We've kind of balanced it around a little bit, and again, totally subjective. Some of you front loaded it, some of you maybe not so much. I hope if the dust settles tomorrow, you can go, "God, I at least know the profiles of these whiskies." And obviously, we had to take one home with you, but yeah, we're here. Any questions? Any distillery? Luckily, we were there 2 weeks ago, so lots of pictures were taken. We saw quite a lot. But yeah, final part for me. Thanks so much for coming. We don't. I think that what gets overlooked quite a lot is the Buffalo Trace, Eagle Rare, Sazerac rye, volume, bulk. But high quality. Without people that spend time, energy, money coming to stuff like this, this would just be a flipping sell it for as much as you possibly can. Slowly but surely, we're not where we want to be. We're getting things in control. And yeah, so kind of thank you for some patience and thank you for supporting the brands all the way through from bars in an old fashioned, spending sensible to quite a lot of money on some of our liquids. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the whiskey that you've tasted, and if you need any more information, just shout.
Thanks very much.
Oh! completely forgotten there's one more. There's one more.
Oh, you got the
Next one, yeah.
Have we poured it? Yeah. So, hence why there's
Pass the bottle around. Yeah.
so same mash bill.
I'll draw the line on it, I know where it's at.
I thought I was going to be taking that one, eh?
You haven't seen his pause.
So where we finished off with the same mash bill number 1. It's a Colonel E.H. Taylor, synonymous with like, you know, developing standards, putting a 1890s, 1897.
Yeah.
Bottling bond, so getting a tax break for making whiskey and not having to pay duty and tax on it straight away, but also, you know, it must be aged in a federally bonded warehouse, minimum 4 years old, 50% ABV. Kind of like in wine, you get that DOCG, so it's paying homage to where it's from, but he was a real iconic figure in setting the standard for bourbon. He had, I mean, we sell E.H. Taylor's small batch, which is obviously at least 50%, and we have that now readily available everywhere. But when I told Liam we were coming here, he said, you've got to bring one of these, and alas, here we are. So this is barrel proof. I haven't actually tasted this, so this is 64.5% ABV, and it's the same mash bill as George T. Stagg. So a little bit lower. What age? Oh, sorry, release.
Generally, I mean, generally with the E.H. Taylor, depending, but we talk, it can be, depending on the SKU, it can be 7 to 10 is sort of the window where we look at on E.H. Taylor. I mean, I'd have to look at the notes on the specific release, but it is, yeah, this is 2022. So it's the same ABV randomly as batch 3. So this only launched in 2011, 2012. And to be honest with this, you can count the amount of cases that leave the US on your two hands. Like you just don't get this. I think this year maybe 5 cases went out to China. You just don't get this outside the US, so it's really, really tough to get. So we always, when we're doing these tastings, and we always try and keep something. Because randomly with stuff from Buffalo Trace, it's, if you've only got 1 or 2 bottles, you're better off tasting it because you can't sell it, because it becomes one of a unicorn. So I'd much rather do it with people that are engaged to talk about the liquid, to get the option to try it. So in the UK, legally, there was a case of this, and that. So this is why there's, you know, having a case is almost like you'd rather not have it. So this is why we actually do it and taste it. So yeah, it is rare. You don't see it in the UK too often. So like I said, it's certainly something we've just, the release last year.
On your deck.
Maybe in Birmingham, yeah.
E.H. Taylor has almost become a sort of, you'll see brands out of the experimental series or out of Warehouse X that have been turned into brands. So E.H. Taylor almost becomes a sort of vehicle for experimentals we want to commercialise, if you like. So you would have seen, I mean, Amaranth, Grain of the Gods, 18-year marriage. We've done a barrel proof rye this year. So it is quite experimental, but I think the big release that you'll start to see coming out, which will become a standard, will be the full grain. So that was a really limited release as an experiment. So it combines the sort of 4 grains of obviously wheat, rye, corn, and barley together. So it became 4 grain. So you'll start to see that being released as a standard line. But again, it's another expression of mash bill 1 at cask strength, which slightly younger than Stagg, and obviously different warehouse location, but again changes the flavour profile. So it's all about that. Our diversity is what makes Buffalo Trace, because we want to have different flavour profiles. And that's exactly what that is under that Taylor. So it's got the signature Taylor style. Before I get into it, but I would generally say Taylor, where it's slightly younger, tends to be not as full-bodied, slightly lighter, almost less viscous. I think Stagg you can almost taste the viscosity and the thickness on the palate. Taylor tends to be just that bit lighter, even though it's still got high proof. but again at 64.5 on the nose, not so much. You get a bit of heat up front, but it's deceptively drinkable for a 64.5%. So yeah, I mean, on behalf of Mars, this is Mars' account, it's Mars' tasting, but from my point of view, I mean, as I'm sure you said, thank you for coming. It's to meet people that actually drink the liquid is quite rare. It's why we do these, and the more people drink it, the more allocation we get. It's the more times you see product on auction sites is when the US say to me, well, you're not selling it because it's coming straight back here. So that's the whole point of actually getting liquid into hand and getting people to drink it, which is why we do this. So,
is that something you think you can get a hand on and stop?
Well, I mean, I've been here 4 years. I'd like to think there's less because of how we're controlling it. I mean, every time you see a duty stamp, we know it's UK. So my job, and I was tasked with it when I came here, obviously trying to sell the portfolio, but also trying to understand retailers of who works and who doesn't. And you can only go so far because we work with the guys know their customers, but there'll always be someone that goes, well, I'll get access to it, I'll flip it. And unfortunately, because it's a supply and demand issue, if you're buying a product from Buffalo Trace that you're lucky enough to get access to, chances are you can double your money as a minimum. But for us, it's about trying to get people drinking it. And if you drink it and you like the liquid, that's how we grow the brand and you get more of it. It's not rocket science. No. You know, if it's depleting and we're getting through it, you get more allocation. And that's, as I said, we've just opened office in Switzerland. Buffalo Trace is a distillery and as a company, Sazerac as a company, we're expanding. So we bought distilleries in India. We bought a distillery in Sligo to increase paddy production. So that will become the home of paddy in Sligo. We own our distribution in the UK, we own our distribution in Australia. So we're at the very sort of start of the journey, even though the distillery is 200-year-old, but now we're starting to expand into Europe, we're starting to expand globally. So the more it's drunk, the more readily available. The fact that you can come in here and pick up a bottle of Eagle Rare, it's not allocated, we have enough of it, like, we're almost spoiled because that becomes a staple. Yeah, and that's why you see Americans come over going, well, you can buy Eagle Rare. Like,
we jokingly say when you go to America, you should take a few bottles of Eagle Rare with you to trade.
Honestly,
they'll fall over themselves.
Buffalo Trace in Covent Garden, that's the thing that churns, because it's. We went into Covent Garden because it was a third American tourism, so the footfall was good. But the brand that sells is Eagle Rare 10, and it's generally those Americans because they can't get it at home. They're here for a weekend. It's literally pick it up and go home.
I remember speaking to Alan at Jerry's, didn't we? He said like Americans are coming here and buy like a case of them because they can't believe it.
No, and that's part of the globalisation plan, because the idea is, you know, you're trying to raise everything all at the same time. As I said, if you speaking to Jake, the CEO out in Switzerland, he was saying if you look at Jack Daniels in the US, it's 5 million cases, I think is the number. Jack's not going to grow to 10 million, because in the US, that's the number. So if we weren't trying to globalise, you might nick 1 million or 2 off Jack, but then you're at capacity. So unless you're trying to grow it, all right, Jack's 1 million cases here, but Jack's not going to grow in the UK to 2 million cases or 3 million cases. That's sort of the level. At Buffalo Trace, we're at 50,000 cases, so the potential to get to that level, and that's why we're trying to raise everyone at the same time, and we're actually over-indexed in the UK to get the brand built. That's why we've got Covent Garden, it's why we work with these guys to get access to liquid. So the more you drink, the more you get. I don't know if that's, you might want to take that off the camera.
I mean, I'm working on it.
Responsible drinking.
I'm doing my best.
Consume responsibly with water.
Yeah, enjoy responsibly, isn't it?
You'll keep up with me, you don't be laughing.
But yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
No one
as
can
I
keep
said,
up with you.
we have some amazing liquids. As I said, you don't have to like everything, but we hope we've found something that you like, and it gives you an option to understand the flavour or a mash bill that you like to sort of go and look further into it. But thank you for coming. It's a great opportunity for us to be able to get out and talk to people that want to actually drink the liquid. And as we look to get more and more volume, we look to do more and more of this up and down the country, working with retailers and specialists. So, thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers. Gentlemen, thank you.
Is this where we get to do our typical Rod Stewart?
Right, folks. Obviously, you know, there's also retail angle involved here. If you did enjoy something so much that you'd like to take it home with you, which I suspect will be the case, considering what's on the shelf at the moment.
Alright.
Or leave it.
Just get something.
Toast your street tomorrow.
There'll be loads on board. So obviously, you know, we're going to have to come up with some kind of system just for first dibs. But like I say, don't get too hung up on it. There's no wrong answers here. You're all leaving with something nice. If you do wish to buy a bottle, just bear with us 2 moments. I think what we're going to do is just write out your names on a bit of paper, fold it up. This is going to be rudimentary as hell, so just bear with us. Yeah, stay seated, have a chat, and we'll finish the roll in a moment.
Here we are. Van Winkle 12. Not bad for like first ever, like, oh yeah, tried it for the first time, buy a bottle. So we've picked up that. We've also picked up a Woodford Wheated and the, what is it, the Old Scout pick. Old Scout?
Yeah, big Old Scout, yeah.
Yeah, an Old Scout is going to run down the basement and pick it up. So we'll pick up an Old Scout as well. Fantastic tasting from Nickolls and Perks. So always a great opportunity to come down here. Ironically, dead last in the allocated pick. But what was fantastic about that is you can be dead last, and dead last equals a Pappy 12. I am absolutely ecstatic because that's such a rare opportunity. And what is a really great thing about this is you'll notice that this is opened. So it's opened to make sure that it never ends up on an auction house. It's here for the drinkers, and that's what it's designed for. Thank you so much for tuning in. This was probably a huge video. It's going to take me ages to edit. But if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe because it makes my emotions great. And it's just fun to like know that people care. This is whiskey content in the UK, and have a great one. I'll see you next time.